The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Afghanistan is once again under Taliban rule. It happened even before the final U.S. military personnel left the country on August 31st. Tonight, ahead of the world premiere of the TVO original documentary Ghosts of Afghanistan, we tune into the conversation taking stock of the legacy of that war and what lies ahead for the Central Asian country. First, however, we hear from a Canadian who survived the terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, that spurred the U.S. and its allies to undertake what became a 20-year war in Afghanistan. It's Wednesday, September 8th, and that's next on The Agenda. "20 years ago, Canadian businessman Brian Clark was working on the 84th floor of the World Trade Center's South Tower when two planes struck the Twin Towers. The terrorist attack killed more than 2,600 people in New York City. And while most of us remember exactly where we were when it happened, few people have the recollection that he has. He is one of only 18 people in his building to escape from a floor where the plane struck. And Brian Clark joins us now from Mahwah, New Jersey. Brian, it's so good to meet you, and I'm really grateful that you've agreed to sort of relive the awful events of 20 years ago with us tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I was given a gift that I can tell my story. I have not been haunted by it, so I appreciate your sincerity and your gentleness there, but I'm okay, thank you.
Glad to hear it. I wonder if you could take us back to 9/11/01 and tell us whether the day started for you just like any other.
It was a blue sky, normal day. You know, my commute took about an hour and 20 minutes to, an hour and 10 minutes to get to the World Trade Center. I would arrive at about 7:20, but it was a normal commute. Nobody expecting anything that happened eventually.
A normal commute to what job that you were doing at the time?
I worked for a company called Eurobrokers. It was actually a company started in Toronto in 1970. I joined in late 72, and in the middle of 74, July 74, the entire company moved to New York City and relocated to the World Trade Center. So that's where I was headed.
When the first plane hit the North Tower, the one beside you, not the one you were in, what were you able to see and hear at that moment before 9 a.m. Eastern Time?
I was sitting in my personal office on the west side of the South Tower and typing away at my keyboard, and at 8:46 there was this loud double boom, and I didn't know what it was, but at that instant the lights above me flickered. I reacted like wondering what that was, and my peripheral vision behind me caught something against the window, and I spun right around, and against the windows, 84 floors in the air, were flames just swirling away. It was a sight that you don't expect to see, 84 floors in the air. And that was the first plane hitting next door. The first tower got hit about the 93rd floor, and the flames just washed through the building and washed past my window.
Did you have any idea what it was?
I didn't at the time. I incorrectly actually thought that there was perhaps a construction worker, a welder had hit a gas line, you know, maybe on the 85th or 86th floor, and the explosion had spilled out the building.
Now, 17 minutes later, the second plane hits, and that's the one that hits your building, partially on your floor, South Tower. My goodness, look at that picture. I haven't seen that picture in 20 years. This is for those who can't see it and who are listening on podcast, one tower has been hit, and there's the plane about to hit. We're now looking at an image of the second plane having hit the second tower, the tower that you are in, and the massive fireball emanating from that second tower. At that moment, what are you thinking?
I was talking to a coworker. Fortunately, you know, just at randomness, I was on the west side of our building, and I said, what have you heard going on? And my coworker, Bobby Call, said to me, well, I was down a few flights. I heard the announcement that our building was secure, so I came back up the stairs. And he was telling me just that mini story when boom, boom, louder this time, when our building got hit on the south side, and I was up fairly near the northwest corner and somewhat protected, fortunately. But in an instant, our room fell apart and the building swayed, and I was afraid for 10 seconds while it swayed toward the Hudson River and then back to vertical. When it came back to vertical, this feeling washed over me that we're going to be okay.
You actually
I did know in an instant that it was terrorism. I mean, having seen what had happened next door and now what was happened in our building, it was obvious.
So you knew instantly it was an airplane hitting?
I didn't know it was an airplane, but I knew it was terrorism of some sort.
Now, this isn't the first time the Twin Towers have been hit, right? There was the bomb that went off in the basement in 1993. Were you there then as well?
Yes, I was. Our offices at that time were on the 31st floor in the North Tower, as luck would have it. And we moved after that bombing. We moved to the 84th floor of the South Tower back in February, March of 1993.
And you were mentioning you felt the building sway. I mean, did you actually think it was going to fall over?
For 5 seconds, I did have that feeling cross my mind. And this sounds maybe rather silly, but I recall this is what I felt at the moment. I felt like I needed to grab onto something as the building was going to fall over, which is a silly thing to think. But in that split second when the room fell apart and things were chaotic, that was the thought that crossed my mind. But as I said, it stopped after 5 seconds and came back to vertical. It was just a half oscillation and then back to vertical.
Now, Brian, I wonder if after the first plane hit, did people turn their television sets on and therefore have some sense about what was going on?
We were a brokerage operation with lots of trading, lots of television sets all over the trading floor. And immediately all of those TV sets went from financial information to news, if you like. And we were watching the same thing on our TV sets that anybody in Ontario or Singapore or Sweden, were watching. All the telephoto long shot lenses from Midtown down to the financial district in the south tip of Manhattan.
Now, whatever happened to you that day is just something that is incomprehensible. People just don't think that's going to happen to them when they go to work in the morning. How long did it take you to sort of figure out what actually was going on?
I led a group of people down the stairs from 84, and we only got down to the 81st floor. There's about 6 or 7 people behind me, if you like. I happened to have a flashlight with me that I had been trained as a volunteer fire marshal on our floor after the 93 bombing, and they had given us flashlights. I put that in my pocket when the first plane hit, not knowing if I would need it or not. Fortunately, I had it with me. So as we went down just these 3 floors, we got stopped by a woman coming up the stairs. And she said, "You can't go any lower. We've come off a floor in flames." She was talking about a coworker of hers that was coming up the stairs with her. And we got into a bit of a debate. And the argument was, should we go higher, should we go lower? And in the midst of this debate or discussion, I heard a banging noise inside the 81st floor. And I grabbed the shoulder of the person beside me, coincidentally another Canadian, Ron DiFrancesco, a coworker. And Ron and I went in to find this person who was crying for help on the 81st floor. Very sadly, however, as I slipped through the crack in the wall to get onto the 81st floor, I could see all my friends turning around and going up the stairs, and they all died that day. It was that memory is not a good one for me, obviously. But we went on to find the stranger's voice. Ron was completely overcome with smoke right beside me. Very strange. And I was breathing normally. I can't explain that, nor in hindsight can Ron. I mean, we've talked since. Fortunately, he went down and survived the day. But I carried on and found this stranger in the rubble, dug him out. He and I went back to the stairs. I shone my light down the stairs. I didn't see the flames that the lady had talked about. So I just knew I had to test it. And my new best friend, Stanley Premnath, who was the stranger that I'd never met before, he and I started down the stairs. And after, almost an hour, it was about 5 minutes to 10 when we got out of the building. We got about 2 blocks south of the towers, turned around and watched the South Tower collapse.
All right, I want to go back a little before that, before we talk about that. Stanley.
Yeah.
Okay, when you found Stanley, and you rescued him, and he realized he had a chance to make it. What did he do?
Well, he was actually stuck behind a wall, an immovable wall, but he punched a hole in it down near the floor level, and he had his arm out through the hole, waving frantically. As I approached him, he said, with my flashlight, and I shone the light up his arm and into his eyes, "Hallelujah, I've been saved." He said, "One thing I've got to know, do you know Jesus Christ?" And I wasn't ready for a theological discussion at that point, and I stammered out a rather weak, "I go to church every Sunday." That was the best I could do at that moment. We worked hard to get rid of debris my side, debris where he was, and I stood a desk up on its end, climbed up and looked over the wall down into the pit where he was. And I said, "The only way out of there is for you to come up this wall." And he jumped. I missed him the first time. The second time he jumped, I grabbed under his arm or something, heaved him up over the wall, and the weight of him coming onto my body, the desk tipped over. We fell on my back. He gave me a great big kiss, and he said, "We'll be brothers for life." I said, "Well, I don't have any siblings." I said, "Okay, we can be brothers." And I noticed that I had a puncture wound on my right palm. Stanley had a puncture wound on one of his palms, and I pushed them together, and I said, "In fact, we'll be blood brothers." So Stanley Premnath and I are blood brothers to this day.
Isn't that something? Are you still in touch?
Stanley, one of us calls the other every month or so. We get asked to do interviews together, when we get up to times like this, these anniversaries. Stanley has come to my church to speak. I've spoken at his church. We've each gone to one of our daughter's weddings. So yeah, we're good friends. We stay in touch. The difficulty is we both live opposite sides of Manhattan. So it's about a 2-hour drive from my house to his house, which makes it a little less easy to socialize. But on occasion we do.
Wonderful. Now, I'll ask you to pick up the story where we left off a moment ago, which is to say you did get out of the building, you did get some blocks away, and then you saw it collapse. Tell us about that moment.
We got about 2 blocks south of the Trade Center and got on the south side of Trinity Church, which is at the intersection of Wall Street and Broadway. And Stanley turned more than 90 degrees around, and he looked back at the World Trade Center site. And from that angle, the South Tower that we had come out of blocked the view of the North Tower. So we could only see the tower that we had come out of. And he said, "I think that tower could come down." And I said, "There's no way. That's a steel structure. That's just furniture and carpets and drapes burning." And as I said that, from the top, we saw this little wiggle back and forth, and then boom, 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 floor by floor, it pancaked down. Took about 8 to 10 seconds for the whole building to dissolve. Trinity Church acted like a seawall, a wave slamming into a seawall, because that white cloud that came out, debris out of the Trade Center when it collapsed, it slammed into Trinity Church and exploded outward. And so he and I were now in this great big air bubble. We realized it was going to crash down on us. We ran up to Broadway, maybe 20 yards, and then ran down Broadway. And as the wave rolled up behind us, at random, we went into a building I'd never been in before, 42 Broadway. And there we were while that wave washed by us. It got very dark outside, but he and I talked for 45 minutes. At 10:30, after 30 minutes of discussion, the North Tower came down, but we didn't know that at the time.
Now, let me just make sure I've got this right. Did that church, in acting like a seawall or a buffer between you and the collapsing structures, did it prevent you, therefore, from ingesting a lot of the asbestos and other stuff that ended up killing so many people after the fact from cancer?
I believe that's true, although, the fullness of time will tell. I don't remember breathing deeply anything that I didn't really like, other than when our building got hit, our room was instantly filled with lots of construction dust, not black smoke, not flames, just as if somebody took a bag of cement and waved it in the air. It was sort of this gritty, you wanted to spit it out, tough to breathe. But I don't believe that I inhaled any of that asbestos-laden stuff. I don't know. Like I say, time will tell. But at the moment, I feel healthy. Thank you.
Good to hear that. We're going to put a picture up here of just the kind of thing I was discussing. I mean, here's a trio walking through the streets, again, covered in the remnants of the building. And do you know any of these people, or do you recognize this scene?
I'm familiar with that type of scene. That's when Stanley and I went out of the backside of 42 Broadway. It was right behind the New York Stock Exchange, and we walked onto Broad Street, and it was like a winter's day. There was litter everywhere, and this, 2 inches of snow on the roads, on parking meters, on mailboxes, on whatever, abandoned cars, and so on. But it wasn't crowded. It was like some of those pictures you just showed. It wasn't densely populated. This was real aftermath stuff. And we walked down Broad Street toward the East River.
Brian, were you at any point up until that moment able to call family members and tell them where things were at with your own circumstances?
The one call I made from the building before I got out was coincidentally, as I mentioned earlier, we were on the 31st floor of the North Tower in '93. From the 31st floor of the South Tower, we got into Oppenheimer's space, and I called my wife at home at about 9:35, so half an hour after our building had been hit. And our house had filled up with some neighbors, some people from our church. 3 of my 4 children had come from wherever they were working, and were being supportive of my wife at home. And I told my wife, I'm on the 31st floor. I've got a good story to tell you. I'm okay. We're getting out of the building, that sort of thing. And put down the phone because Stanley wanted to use it to call his wife and so on. So my wife turned around and told this house full of 25, 30 people, Brian's okay. He's got a great story to tell. He'll be out of the building in 2 hours. But the problem with that was I didn't say that. But it had taken 2 hours to get out of the building in 1993 because the stairways were filled with people on that occasion. When Stanley and I were descending, there was nobody in the stairway. So we had a free shot. We got out of the building in 25 minutes. But my wife was telling everybody I'd be out in 2 hours. So when the building did collapse, everybody in my house thought I was a goner.
Oh, my goodness. At what point did you actually get home to be able to confirm to everybody that you'd made it?
Well, the first confirmation that after the buildings collapsed that I could tell everybody, I caught a ferry over to Jersey City, and in the ticket office, I used the ticket seller's phone, called home at about 11:15. So I had been dead for an hour and 15 minutes as far as they were concerned. And I called, got through, no busy signal, which statistically I certainly could have had. The phone was ringing off the hook that day. And my wife came on the phone, and I said, I was oblivious to the pain they were going through at home because I hadn't said 2 hours. She collapsed on the floor. I really didn't talk to her, but I told somebody else in our house that I'd be walking up to Hoboken to get a train, which I did, and I pulled in the driveway at 1:15 in the afternoon with a horn blaring, and a big love fest happened on the front lawn.
Sweet. Brian, this is going to be a bit of an odd question, so hang in there with me here. Obviously, thousands of people lost their lives that day. Others who survived suffered terrible PTSD or survivor's guilt or that kind of thing. You don't seem to have been affected that way. Do you know why?
I don't know why. I accept it as a gift. I can't explain it. I take no credit for it. I realize how fortunate I am, but I hope everyone knows how grateful I am as well. That I haven't had one nightmare. My head hits the pillow at night. I fall asleep. I can't explain it, but I'm, as I say, very, very grateful because I know it's agony for many other people still after 20 years.
Who do you find yourself thinking about on this anniversary?
Well, Stanley, certainly. I mean, my blood brother and I are close on this, but our company lost 61 people out of the 250 employees that were on the 84th floor. And many of them have different stories. Some of them reached the ground and then were killed doing good deeds. So there's many stories, and everybody has a story that's valid wherever they were. But the one person, in addition to Stanley, that I think of most often is a fellow named Jose Marrero, because as Stanley and I descended on the 68th floor, coming up the stairs was Jose Marrero, a co-worker carrying a walkie-talkie, talking to some of my coworkers up above. And I said, Jose, where are you going? What are you doing? He said, I'm going up to help Dave Vera in particular. He's on the walkie-talkie. He's helping people. I'm going up to help him. And I gave rather a weak excuse, perhaps. I said, well, I'm getting this fellow from Fuji Bank out. I didn't really know Stanley very well, other than he's now my brother, my blood brother. But I said, I'm getting this fellow from Fuji Bank out. He said, I'll be okay. And up he went. And of course, that day, Jose, doing good deeds, died.
Ugh. You know, I guess there's a continuum of experience on this thing. At the one end, some people have said, I survived because God was with me. And there are others at the other end of the continuum who say it was just plumb luck and there's really no rhyme or reason why I'm still here and so many others are not. Where are you on that continuum?
I'll say I've got a bit of both because, you know, selfishly, egotistically, one likes to think one's in control. But if you're a believer, you know someone else is in control. And at moments during that day, I think I'm taking credit for making the left turn or the decision to do so-and-so. But I will also tell you throughout that day, there were some very strange things going on that are inexplicable. When Ron was overcome with smoke, around my head was this bubble of fresh air. It was noticeable. There's something strange about that. So I will accept the fact that, you know, the Lord was with me that day and guided me out. I'll say that was true.
Can I assume you've said the odd prayer or two since that day?
Yes, all with gratitude, thankfulness, yes.
Well, I'm so sorry that it was the circumstances of 20 years ago that are the reason why you and I are talking today. But I will add to that, I'm awfully glad to meet you, and I'm very glad you survived it all. And we're delighted that you spent so much time with us on TVO tonight, sharing your memories of that day. Thank you, Brian.
Well, coming from Toronto originally, I've got lots of friends in Ontario, so I wave a hello to all of them. Thank you for having me on today.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Just weeks after the terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, the U.S. and its NATO allies, including Canada, commenced military operations to hunt down Osama bin Laden and topple the Taliban government in Afghanistan, which had allowed him to operate in their country. 20 years later, after the longest war in America's history, the U.S. military has just withdrawn, and the Taliban has named a new government. With us to reflect on all of what's happened, we're joined in Tuscany, Italy, by journalist Graham Smith, who was the Globe and Mail's Afghanistan correspondent from 2005 to 2011, and he co-wrote the TVO original documentary Ghosts of Afghanistan, which has its world broadcast premiere tonight. He's currently a consultant researcher for the Overseas Development Institute. In Oslo, Norway, Aisha Wallasmal, an Afghan-Norwegian humanitarian consultant who works with women in southern Afghanistan. In Little Harbour, Nova Scotia, Peter MacKay, counsel at McInnes Cooper, and of course, a former Minister of Defence for Canada and a Conservative MP. In the Barrhaven area of Ottawa, Stephen Seidemann, Patterson Chair in International Affairs at Carleton University and author of Adapting in the Dust, Lessons Learned from Canada's War in Afghanistan. And in Mississauga, Ontario, Bilal Sarwari, a journalist whose family was just forced to flee Afghanistan for Canada. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening for a hugely timely and important conversation in advance of the documentary of Graham's that we're going to show right after this program. Aisha, I wonder if you'd get us started by just telling us, in your view, what the overarching emotion that everyday Afghans are feeling right now.
Wow, that is such a big question. Let me just say I do not represent 40 million people. But I think, you know, the emotions are divided. You have those Afghans who feel severely betrayed and abandoned by America, by Canada, by their own governments, by their own political leadership. And then you have a fair chunk of Afghans that feel liberated, that feel victorious. So, I mean, I think it's really important to underline that there is not one sentiment coming out of Afghanistan today. Personally, I would say that the sentiment that I am feeling is nervousness, a lot of nervousness on what the future holds for Afghanistan.
Understandably so. Bilal, let me get you to follow up on that, because I think we want to get a better understanding of what it was like for you and your family, who essentially had to run for their lives in order to get on a plane and get out of your homeland. What was all that like?
Well, I was forced to leave Kabul, my city, my home, my circle of friends, and most importantly, my profession, after the Taliban continued to make visits to my office and home, which are next to each other, and I had to leave fearing for the safety of my newly born daughter and family. Obviously, I had been to the West on many different occasions. I had studied in the US, and I had no intention of leaving Afghanistan, but it is that sense of fear and uncertainty that is there, and the Taliban may have been promising a lot of nice things, but their words are not matched by action on the ground. Perhaps it's the different groups of the Taliban fighters and commanders. I don't know. Despite getting in touch with certain Taliban officials and leaders, including some of them that I had known personally as friends, I did not feel safe. And the moment I made it to the Hamid Karzai International Airport, thanks to the Qatari ambassador who evacuated 150 plus Afghans, most of them are colleagues, including those from the civil society, I felt like I was burying my dreams. And it was perhaps the most difficult journey that I would have made in my life to that airport. At least that's how I felt. I felt helpless. I felt betrayed by the former president Ashraf Ghani and his close allies who abandoned Afghanistan, but also a deep sense of betrayal from the West, because we were hoping, amidst all the tragedy and the fighting, that we will eventually have a peace process, that we will eventually have a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire. So unfortunately, our dreams and hopes were shattered, and there was a mass exodus of the Afghan media family and the most educated Afghans that I've known.
You've raised a lot of things there, Bilal, which we'll come back to as the course of our conversation continues. Stephen, I wonder, there's a million questions coming out of all of this, but let me try one of them here. You know, a lot of people are asking whether or not things would have been any different if the exit had happened a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. Was it inevitably going to be a messy departure regardless of when the West left?
I think given the events of the past year, it's pretty clear that it would have been messy one way or another. It could have been a little bit more messy, it could have been less messy. I think one of the strange things is the sudden collapse of the government might have actually done everybody a favor. It left people trapped behind, perhaps, but we didn't get to drawn out street-by-street fighting either, and that could have been much worse for many, many Afghans. So none of this is good, but it's hard to see, given how quick things fell, how it could have been changed in one more year of sticking around, or 2 more years of sticking around. It was very, very difficult, obviously, and I feel bad for your co-panelists here today about what they're experiencing. But it's really hard to imagine what more time would have meant, given 20 years of effort and of money and all the rest of it. The West was simply not willing to reinvest and reinforce their troops in any major kind of way.
Let me get Canada's longest-serving defense minister in for this next thing. And Peter MacKay, I know you're obviously too young to have probably firsthand memories of the image we're about to show you here, and we'll put it up on the screen, and then I'll describe it a bit for those who are watching, listening only on podcast. 2 iconic images clicked 45 years apart. The U.S. Embassy staff fleeing from Saigon, that's the top image, the very famous iconic image of the helicopter taking off in Saigon. And Kabul on the bottom. Never trust a friend who leaves you saying he'll be back. That's an old Vietnamese saying. So says the tweeter in this case. When you see, Peter, the comparisons being made to the way America left Saigon back in 1975, how fair do you think those comparisons are?
I don't think they're that fair. That was a different era, different circumstance, different dynamic entirely. I know people like to simplify. Afghanistan is anything but. And while the departure here was messy, was cumbersome, was uncoordinated, one major difference is we left behind some of our own citizens, and we left behind people who we had an obligation to protect and to evacuate. And gone is the responsibility to protect. This was the responsibility to prevent. And we failed. We did not measure up even to some of our closest allies, the UK, the United States, even Ukraine were able to get people out beyond the effort that Canada made. Now, I have to be very quick to clarify, that is not because of a lack of effort on the part of the men and women of the Canadian Forces, our diplomats, our aid workers, and some, quite frankly, in a private sector effort at the Veterans Transition Network that to this day are continuing to assist Afghans in particular to leave the country, mainly over land to border crossings. But the previous speaker referenced the fact that, this was a long, protracted affair. It certainly was, 20 years. We didn't get the peace dividend that we saw at the end of the Second World War or even in South Korea, despite massive effort and investment, sacrifice, 159 lives, countless more affected by their service psychologically and physically. And so it was a very jarring moment, even though it spanned several days, a week or more, to see all of that turn to dust. And yet I would maintain, Stephen, that this was not in vain. This was an effort to build time and space and allow Afghans to take control of their own destiny. And we simply didn't get there. We absolutely did our level best, and we were liberators. We were not conquerors in any description. We were there to help liberate the people of Afghanistan from the clutches of the Taliban. And when they came back in such a ferocious way, even though we had the intelligence to suggest that it would happen and it would happen quickly. It stunned a lot of experts that they were able to do so with such ease. Basically, the Afghan security forces did not hold.
Is it worth remembering at a moment like this, Aisha, that in spite of your earlier admonitions, the fact that America's efforts did get 120,000 Afghans out of that country who otherwise might have been harmed, tortured, killed, who knows what?
Yes, I'm going to answer that question, but before that, I'd like to respond to one of the remarks of the Minister of Defense, who said, interestingly, keeps saying that they were liberators or not conquerors. I think if you speak to Afghans in the areas that were affected by war, there was no such thing as the West being a liberator. I also noticed he has a very picturesque photo behind him of a woman in a burqa holding a gun. I'd like him to explain whether that is a conqueror woman or a liberated woman. Coming back to your question, I think obviously I do commend all the efforts that went into evacuating Afghan nationals and different citizens. I myself was in Kabul when this all happened. I was working closely with the Norwegians in trying to evacuate people. The point is that obviously the withdrawal was inevitably going to be very messy, but some of the mess could have been avoided. There were thousands of SIV applications, for the Americans at least, that were already submitted. Why did they have to wait till the very end? I mean, we're talking of a superpower. We're talking of a really powerful military alliance. Why wait until Sunday when you see how provincial capitals are falling? That's just, it's a bit bizarre to see countries that are so well prepared normally and that have been in Afghanistan for 20 years that give the impression that they have it all figured out, and then they fail at doing this in a more organized manner, less fussy manner.
Graham, I promise I'm going to get you in here, but I feel I owe it to Peter MacKay to explain that picture behind him. So briefly, Peter, if you would.
Yes, this picture is not meant to be anything disrespectful. This hung on the wall of the ambassador of Afghanistan in Kabul and was gifted to me. I happened to have it in my office at home. It's a very famous picture taken by a Canadian photojournalist named Lana Stasiak, who I spoke to quite recently. And it's a picture of an Afghan policewoman who would never have been permitted to be a policewoman under the Taliban, and yet she was still forced to wear the burqa. And so did we succeed in every aspect of liberating women and children in Afghanistan? No. But did we build thousands of schools? Were we able to get children vaccinated and provide them with hope and a future? There will be an entire generation, 20 years of kids who grew up in Afghanistan who will look to Canada as a country that tried to help them, as did other Western countries, some 60 nations involved in that effort. So it was far beyond the military response to the Taliban and the attack that you referenced at the outset, Stephen, in 9/11. But obviously what we attempted to do there was allow the Afghans to develop governance, to develop all sorts of capacity on their own, and most importantly, education, and give them a future that would lead to a better life.
Which takes me nicely to Graham right now. Graham, thanks for your patience here. And please tell us, in your view, the biggest differences between Afghanistan of today and the one that you reported from 20 years ago.
Well, the original Afghanistan that we found under the Taliban had about 16 million people in it. And now, as Aisha says, it has 38 to 40 million people. So there are a lot more Afghans today than there were. And the former minister is right that there have been improvements in healthcare and education. I am deeply skeptical about whether or not most Afghans would view the Canadians and the Americans and their allies as, quote, liberators. But, you know, that'll be for the Afghans to write that history, not for us to decide. I think it's right now to focus on what can be salvaged from the situation. And if you do still care, for example, about the girls' schools in Kandahar, you know, Canada spent a lot of money trying to make sure that little girls could get an education. And what would be necessary now that the Taliban have completely taken control to actually make sure that those schools continue to function? And it would require, I think, some really humble engagement on humanitarian and development issues. It would require working with the Taliban, which might be difficult for countries like Canada that have been fighting the Taliban previously. But if you actually care about these things, now is the time to engage on the humanitarian development issues.
Fair enough. Graham, follow up with this if you would. How much faith do you think Afghans had in the just opposed government?
You know, as Aisha said, Afghanistan is deeply, deeply divided. And anyone who purports to say what Afghans think is lying to you. The truth of the matter is that it's a very divided country. And about 70% of the country is rural, 30% is urban. The phone calls I'm getting now from the cities, people are panicked. They're really worried about what this means. The phone calls from the villages, you know, the WhatsApp messages, people are delighted. As Aisha says, people are really feeling relieved that the deadliest war on the planet Earth is over. We created a giant military mess. Tens of thousands of people were being killed every single year. Hundreds of thousands were being displaced every single year. And it looks as though that conflict is finally reaching a denouement. So, yeah, it really depends on who you talk to.
Okay, let me ask Bilal the same question. What's your take on that?
Afghans, as Graham rightly said, were desperately trying to take respite from the violence, especially in rural Afghanistan, both in terms of airstrikes, but also, you know, suicide attacks, which would turn funerals into more funerals and wedding into funerals. And this is why you had, you know, widespread calls across the country for a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire. There was a grass movement, you know, grass level movement from Helmand province. You know, they walked barefoot through some of the most difficult and dangerous terrains, calling on all sides to agree to a ceasefire. I think this is what everyone was hoping for, and no one doubted that the Americans and everyone else would go. But people said, leave responsibly. When the Americans started negotiating with the Taliban in Doha, that wasn't the peace deal. That was an exit deal between the Taliban and the Americans. And when President Biden announced the date for withdrawal, he did that in the absence of either the start of a credible peace process or a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire. So to me, that was, you know, the start of what we saw, the crumbling of state institutions, people making their own deals at a village district level with the Taliban, taking their own insurances. And today, what we have to also remember, that the Taliban are no more the shadow government. They control Afghanistan. They are the state. They have to make the transition from fighting into governance, and they have to do so by including everyone else, including the women, which they have not. And if you look at the structure of the Taliban leadership that has just been announced, most of them are on the UN sanction list. So for the Taliban, it will be important to remove those names somehow so that they can have a functioning relationship with the international community. But there are real concerns about people like Sirajuddin Haqqani and many others who have historical and ideological and generational relationships with groups like Al-Qaeda, or the army chief of staff, Fasiuddin, who's from Badakhshan province, he's a Tajik. He's had known links, with groups from Central Asia. What we also see, the Taliban, they have failed to adopt to governance, basically. They're not an insurgency, so if they're in Kabul, that is not a good sign, and that's something that everyone should hold the Taliban responsible. And definitely, now that they are the government, everyone should engage with them and in making sure that those Afghans in need of food and aid and medical help, they don't become the victims of the circumstances.
Aisha, did you want a word on this as well?
Yes, I want a word on everything. I wanted to come back to what Graham was saying, and I think that it's really important to keep the nuances in mind. Yes, the urban populations are panicking because they were more so at the receiving end of what was brought into the country in terms of international aid, and the rural population, on the other hand, they lived under these drones, they lived under bombs, there was no prosperity in those villages. But I'm receiving very, very heartbreaking calls from the women that I worked with in the health sector. They are not being paid their salaries. Their clinics do not have supplies. And that is not the Taliban's fault. That is the international community freezing critical funds. The only sector that actually would have managed would have managed the transition would have been the health sector. Whereas instead of being there for the Afghans who really desperately need these services, we are freezing the funds. So when we talk about, the sense of abandonment, I think US, Canada, allies leaving is not when the abandonment happened. The abandonment will be real when we don't continue to support Afghanistan, when we shut that door entirely to girls' education, to access to healthcare, to protection of journalists. Afghanistan may be divided, but it's still, all these different pockets represent Afghanistan. No one is more Afghan than the other. And here is what we can do as an international community. We just have to make sure that we salvage the gains based on where these gains have been made. In the South, maybe, the gains have been that women actually can work in the health sector. But these women are now, as I said, calling me and they're saying, Aisha, it is already very difficult for us to justify working outside our homes. We travel for hours to get to these clinics. We are not getting paid. How can we justify continuing to work if we are completely kept in the cold, if we are abandoned? In Kabul, we have these brave, fantastic women really organically rising up. How do we support them? This is the time to widen our horizon. This is the time to try to advocate for solidarity between the Afghans and not, push a narrative of this deeply divided country. It is a deeply divided country. What are we doing to support the solidarity efforts?
Well, at the risk of incurring your wrath with this next question, Aisha, I do want to go to Peter and Stephen to get a better understanding of what they think we have been doing there for the last 20 years. And I asked a question in this regard. Peter McKay, to you first. Clearly, we, the West, we, NATO, went into Afghanistan in order to prevent it from being a further staging ground for terrorism after 9/11. That was the immediate short-term mission. It clearly turned into something else after that. Nation building, civil rights, bringing, in some cases, so-called Western values to a place where many criticized our attempts to do that. Was it a mistake to change the mission, in your view?
No, it was an evolution, Steve. They had to start the classic, and it's a trite expression now, but winning hearts and minds meant making significant investments both in infrastructure, roads, bridges that connected communities, assisting in putting in place an irrigation system, for example, outside Kandahar province in the Panjwai. That allowed them to grow wheat rather than poppy, and allowed them to return to some of their traditional crops of grapes and pomegranate and things for export, as opposed to the poppy crop used for heroin that made its way to cities around the world. We built a dam that was helpful in terms of that irrigation process. And to Alicia's point, it was certainly not easy, and every part of the country is different. But let's never forget, as you pointed out, why we went. It was in response to attacks on 9/11, the collaboration, should I use that expression, between Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar, Al-Qaeda, Taliban to strike North America. So it was military, but then the mission clearly evolved when people saw the terrific challenges that people had, including some of the external forces, Iran, Pakistan, other efforts that had been made for centuries to try to conquer Afghanistan. And that's why, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but Canada went there with no expectation of staying, but helping to stand up some semblance of an economy, a nascent education and medical system. And did we get to that point? Well, we bought time, and we trained, and we enabled them to do more for themselves. That was clearly the evolution. And that is what perhaps is part of this terrible narrative now, is that women will not only be not paid, they won't be able to go to work. They can't fill the position of judge or member of parliament, or working alongside men in many cases, let alone being educated alongside men under the Sharia law, or the form of it that's being imposed now by the Taliban. This is where we are stepping back. The entire situation in Afghanistan is falling back to where it was before. And so that was the motivator, was to change the trajectory of the future of Afghanistan in ways that would allow us to have left in a much more productive and graceful way. And that simply didn't happen. We didn't get there as quickly as we'd hoped. The persistence of the Taliban, I think, was beyond everyone's understanding. And yes, there was this divisive nature within the culture of Afghanistan, many of whom were either so terrified that they were going to enable the Taliban, and others who were simply ambivalent and didn't know whether they could trust the West after having seen what Moscow had done, having known the history of their own country. Of course, they're mistrustful of the West.
Let me get Stephen and then Graham on this issue of the advisability of the evolution of the mission. Stephen, go ahead.
Well, I would disagree a little bit with the Minister of Defense. I think the effort is not to win hearts and minds. I think that's mistaken. I think the idea was to build confidence in the Afghan government. And that was the key to building something there. And the problem was that we built on, I don't know if sand is the right analogy, or something even less stable than that, because we enabled warlords who had tragic histories, destructive histories, that when we talk about what the previous folks had done, well, we had not only tolerated, but in some ways fostered the corruption that caused so many people in Afghanistan to be very frustrated with the government that just fell. The reason why it fell was that nobody had confidence in it. And why was that the case? Because it couldn't deliver. It was highly corrupt. The 50 schools that we built in Kandahar, Graham and others have done studies to show that a lot of the schools never really served the purpose of schools, that we built buildings that were not that well built. So Aisha was asking the question of how could we mismanage the end of it? And I would say that wouldn't be a surprise, given that we mismanaged it from the start. That a lot of the ability of the United States and its allies to deliver were very problematic all the way along. If you take a look at our quarterly reports from our mission in Afghanistan that Minister McKay and his government put forth, the last one, or the second to last one, talked about how great the effort was to retrain the wardens and the staffs of the prison in the Saraposa prison. And right around that report came out was the second prison break in Kandahar. And so the first and most important job of any prison is to keep people inside the prison, and we couldn't stop that. And so while there were tremendous efforts made by the people on the ground, the whole of government efforts by every country were aspirations that could ever be met, because the agencies within each country, whether it's the United States, Canada, Denmark, Germany, the UK, whoever, they had a hard time cooperating with each other, not to mention cooperating with people on the ground. We have the six priorities and 3 signature projects. The minister mentioned the dam. The dam never was completed. And in the process of doing so, we had to buy security support from the local security enterprises. And those people may have been playing both sides against us. And so a lot of these efforts were very problematic. The only really enduring legacy are the kids we vaccinated, because they will never get polio. But in terms of the other efforts, it's not clear that how well they benefited the people on the ground and didn't lead to exactly the kind of progress that the minister was talking about.
Graham, can you follow up?
Yeah, I think we could spend a lot of time talking about all the different wrong turns that the international community made in Afghanistan, and it would go way beyond the length of time you have for this broadcast. I recently wrote a foreword for a book that it was called Delivering Osama, and it looked back at the negotiations for Osama bin Laden between the Taliban and the United States before 9/11 and immediately after 9/11. And obviously those negotiations didn't succeed, but you have to imagine to yourself what would have happened if America had just raised the price and purchased Osama from the Taliban. Maybe there would have been no need to invade at all. After invading, at the Bonn conference, you could say that it would have been better to include the Taliban in the ruling setup. But all of these things would have required a level of humility that we, the international community, simply didn't have. We decided what was right for Afghanistan, and we tried to implement it, and we spectacularly failed. And so I think whatever comes next, as Aisha says, will have to be driven by the demands of the local people. If she's getting phone calls from women saying, I want to work in a clinic, how can I get my salary? That's what we should listen to.
All right, let me take that and follow up with Bilal in this regard. You have heard the allegation, I'm sure before, that while the West may have intended to do good in Afghanistan, that the reality of trying to impose Western cultural and gender modern values on a country in which many people are stuck 1,300 years in the past and are deeply conservative about these kinds of changes was a non-starter from the beginning. Could you comment on that?
Well, I don't think Afghans really had a choice when America came into Afghanistan and invaded it in 2001. And then it was a new Afghanistan, with a lot of mistakes made. First of all, the West went and aligned with warlords and former commanders, the same guys who had brought shame and misery on the country in the 90s. Then you had, the door of negotiations closed on the Taliban in the early years. The fighters perhaps went back to rural Afghanistan. The leadership went to Pakistan, where they got institutional support from ISI and Pakistani army. And then President Bush at that time invaded Iraq. So all the resources and attention was hijacked. I would also say, that the West and the international community should have invested and committed to a comprehensive peace process. They should have not, been, announcing all these artificial timelines and deadlines. They should have just made sure that, okay, now we're leaving. We have to have a credible and meaningful peace process. This is what we can leave behind for the Afghan people. As you know, the former American administration was more lenient towards the Taliban. They legitimized the Taliban, and it was obviously the weakness of former Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and all the politicians, including Hamid Karzai, who were bickering among themselves. Everyone saw the peace process as a milking cow. So at the end of the day, Afghan people for the last 20 years, whether you talk about villages or cities, they've all wanted a peaceful life. I would say that having traveled to all of the provinces and having lived in Kabul as my home, we saw some of the most destructive in devastating wave of attacks by Taliban in the Islamic State, from a 6-ton truck bomb being detonated in the middle of the city to entire families being vanished in these attacks. I think the whole country was bleeding. The new front line was everywhere. So the end result obviously was a military takeover by the Taliban. The end result was also that all state institutions, which were crucial for the people of Afghanistan, they all crumbled. They all basically vanished in a matter of seconds. And then we saw an evacuation in the 11th hour by the international community, a very chaotic one, which had a lot of tragic, scenes and events, as we saw, people trying to cling on a plane, dying, falling, instantly dying. We saw suicide attacks, we saw stampede, and we saw Taliban soldiers, literally opening fire on people. We saw the same from the Americans as well as their special forces allies. At the end of the day, the Afghan people, even today, want a more sense of stability. They are living in a sense of, they are sensing fear and uncertainty. They want the Taliban to deliver services. People want basically to have their jobs back, to have their salaries, and to have a situation in a place like Panjshir where you cannot find 1 kg of rice for ordinary civilians, is simply heartbreaking,
Yeah, we're down to our last couple of minutes here, and Aisha, I want to hear from you, if I can, on the issue of women in Afghanistan going forward, because whether the West should have been there or shouldn't have been there, I don't think you can quibble with the fact that the West hoped to make life for women in Afghanistan better. So my question is, are women going to be allowed to work now? Are girls going to be allowed to go to school? Are they going to try to prevent women under the age of 18 from being married off? What's the future in terms of all of that?
Oh, those were too many questions and not enough time. I'm going to try my best. So I want to come back to your question about, will women be able to work? Will they be able to go to school? I'd like to say yes, because what I'm seeing is that the female colleagues that I worked with in the Deep South, whether it's Kandahar, Helmand, Uruzgan, they're going to work. They're all in the health sector. Girls going to schools. We saw girls going to schools across Afghanistan. We also saw a picture of a private university where women and men are sitting next to each other with a partition in the middle. That is something that is difficult for me to stomach. That is something I'm sure the minister does not approve of. But the fact of the matter is, the Taliban are now the ruling party. I mean, they weren't elected, but they are now the rulers of Afghanistan, whether we like it or not. How do we ensure that the international community could pressure them, could condition aid to make sure that as many women as possible can have access to their workplaces, as many girls up to 12th grade, up to higher education, have the possibility to continue their education? Afghan women will not be able to do these things without a sustained attention from the world, without the Minister of Defense in Canada still talking about this issue in a year, without him and his government committing funds to Afghanistan. And lastly, I'd like to thank both Stephen and the minister for mentioning the issue of vaccination. I work on polio vaccination in Afghanistan, so I know that that has been a really great success story, but even there, we've had our setbacks.
Aisha, I'm going to take that thank you to the two other guests, because I don't want people to have to wait a second longer than they have to get to Graham's documentary, which is going to come on immediately after this program. So can I just thank all of you for joining us tonight for a very important conversation here on TVO. Graham Smith, Aisha Walasmal, Peter McKay, Stephen Seidemann, and Bilal Sarwarwi. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, September 8th, 2021. Tomorrow is the only English language federal leaders debate of this general election. Before it gets underway, we'll delve into what motivates voters to make their mark. Also, a look at Quebec's role in this federal race. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. We'll see you again tomorrow, but remember, you can stream the TVO original documentary, Ghosts of Afghanistan, on the website tvo.org/documentaries, or stay with us for the world broadcast premiere on TVO right now.